This video, I guess, is the traditional recap and commentary video following a session of All for One Regime Diabolique and our shared campaign, Lights and Darkness. All for One Regime Diabolique is produced by Triple Ace Games, and it's the game of supernatural, swashbuckling horror. It's a musketeers-based game. In 17th century France, the musketeers against mundane threats to the king or against the supernatural darkness that's laying over France. We get a kick out of this game. It was an experiment. It was an experiment in collaboration, and it was an experiment for the other players to get to know All for One, as they hadn't played it yet, and it was an experiment for some of the players to get more experienced using Ubiquity, and for one of the players to experience using Ubiquity at all. Well, now that experiment is over. The campaign, thankfully, survives. All for One, Regime Diabolique, managed to bring the four of us together, and we discovered that special alchemy that happens between some players sometimes. And the characters that we created work together in a variety of different combinations, and each session with its different game master, of course, feels different, but each combination of characters also feels different. And there's a magic in that is difficult to explain. But at the end of the experiment, once all four of us had a chance to run the game for the others, and once I had the pleasure of running solo sessions for the other three after they had done their bit as game masters, we had a discussion. Did we want to continue, or had we finished what we set out to do? So obviously we decided to continue, at least for one more round, one more cycle around the table. And I'm glad. I cannot describe how much I have enjoyed not only getting to explore this game that I enjoy so much with these guys, but just getting to play with these guys. Each session, the connection grows stronger, and anybody who's played with an established group knows what I'm talking about. And these guys are particularly good at all the things that develop in a group that's familiar with each other, how quickly they can read the intent of the other players, how well they can sync what they want to do with what the game is really about, matching the genre, the expectations, the context of what has come before, everybody's shared hopes about what will come next, that sort of thing. Who these characters are, even in moments where things seem to be discordant, is growing more and more tightly tied together, and the way the characters kind of surf the wave of discovery and anticipation because of the talents of their players is so satisfying. And it's great to have a permanent record of it. So that we could go through and do this a second time is like a blessing. So that brings me to commentary. This session was very unusual for me. If you watch this channel, you know I don't plan out what I do. Or at least that's my preference. If I'm going to do a one-shot, of course, I have to take a lot more care. I have to set more things in motion. I might have to create the characters, and there will need to be some interference on my part to make that experience coherent and representative of what the game is. Because that's the reason why you play a one-shot, to show people at least a taste of the game. But given my druthers, I don't do that. I have a starting point that makes sense for those characters to be in, and we go from there and we see what happens. Well, there's a lot of support for improv in All for One Regime Diabolique. We have the entire city of Paris. It's extremely well laid out to use, no matter where the players decide to send the characters. And it's filled with hints and seeds and insights into characters and insights into locations and how everything ties together, and that's great. The core book gives you a great sense of how to merge these different things together, how to merge the charm, the charisma, the daring do, the swashbuckling nature, the high level of ego and arrogance, the flamboyance, the rivalries that being a musketeer means. How to blend that aspect with the supernatural. How is it that the legends, the myths, the stories of our world can be the reality of their world without it being a nightmare world? And I like that. And I like how it's been developing and taking shape in our campaign. A little more flamboyant than might appear in my own campaign, because it exists in these linked one-shots. A little more dramatic, a little more flamboyant than I would probably be able to inspire in my own game, because of the talents, the natures, and the preparation of the characters. The alchemy of the experience is fantastic. And so, preparing for this session had me reviewing who the characters are. I decided to phrase the second cycle of sessions as Book 2, Volume 1. I'm running Volume 1. There'll be 4 volumes, just like in the opening round, the experimental phase. But what would characterize the beginning of Book 2? And I looked back at my first session. This was a session that I wanted to enable each character to have a moment to do what they do. That was my sole goal. So we ran through that session with each character having their moment to do what they do, and each player to discover what that felt like in play, mechanically what that required of them in play, and so on and so forth. And it also framed the backdrop of who I was hoping to play. If we liked that experience, we'd bring that character in. If we didn't like that experience, I would create a new character. So, when I looked at this session, what had happened since that first session? What other things, what other stories, what other drives were coming full circle? And at the same time, I was rereading for the 1000th time The Three Musketeers, and I was listening to an audiobook presentation of 20 years after. So I've got the Musketeers as young and younger men, and them as old, practically retired men. And this contrast kind of mirrored the contrast I was seeing getting ready to launch the second cycle. And it's so strange because it feels like the campaign has been going on for a long time, and yet it also feels like the campaign has just begun. There have been 4 main sessions, and there have been 3 solo sessions. So in total, until yesterday, there were only 7 sessions. But there were recap videos, some of which were in character. There is a OneNote file containing, all of the characters and the NPC characters, and it's slowly being added to over time with the theories and events and the cast of each of the sessions. So there is this deeper sense of the campaign world that you might have after only 7 sessions, especially short sessions like we run. It feels both old and new. And I felt it was time to bring out some of the original aspects of the characters, things that inspired their creation, rather than simply continuing kind of dogmatically from what exactly had happened in the previous session. So, I looked at all the characters. I looked at Briscoe, who's had to recently defend his joie de vivre, his way of enjoying life and his way of taking advantage of opportunity, seeking happiness where it is, living in the moment, larger than life, and spreading happiness, as he says. So convinced is he of his worldview that he shook the faith and convictions maybe of his local priest. That's interesting, this character. And he has this profound impact on those around him. But where is he going? Is he always just going to live in the moment? Are these horrible things which have happened around him and recently happened to him, are they going to change him in some way? Are they going to make him proactive in some area? This was a question that I have. I don't know or or have any attachment to how it might be answered, but it's a question I want to pose. And then I look at Philippe. And Philippe, if we have a D'Artagnan in our group, the character that maps most closely to the attitudes that we see in both young and old D'Artagnan is Philippe. Philippe, who is becoming the master of what he can do as a person. Where is all this energy and enthusiasm? Where is it going to go? Again, it's a question of where is this character going? Is he likewise just existing in the moment? Is he doing his duty? Is he seeking fame to enhance his experience of the now? Or is there some more permanent goal or change or direction that he wants to make? What is happening to Philippe? All these things are happening around him. They don't seem to be affecting him as a person. They seem to be affecting his career. They seem to be affecting his friendships, but they don't really seem to be changing him. Is this the immortality and invulnerability of youth? And will this slowly change as the character ages? This is a question that I have. And then I look at Jean-Marie. Jean-Marie, who is in the Musketeers in hopes of accomplishing a very specific other goal, similar to Martin. So we have these two matched sides of coins. We got Briscourt and Philippe on one hand. We've got Jean-Marie and Martin on the other. And I didn't really have to think about Martin because he's not involved in this session. But I did think a lot about Jean-Marie and how dark this character is and how each session has directly affected who the character is and, by extension, how the character is played. And this question for the other two of what will happen next takes on a different kind of resonance with that character. It's how long before he has to act kind of question. How long can we keep on with this, with the foundation of this character without giving him the opportunity to address it? And that became the core of my idea for the session, is that Jean-Marie needed at least the opportunity to make a choice about his vow to avenge the death of his son at the hands of a werewolf. So, this is a supernatural world. This is a world where people believe that ghosts are real. We've played 4 sessions, so I started to imagine moving through the seasons. And so I brought us back full circle to autumn. And at the end of autumn, we have the Feast of All Saints. And the night before, we have the Night of All Hallows. And I thought, well, what if we have a session that's not a Halloween session, but one where Jean-Marie can come face to face with his vow. That was the image I had in my mind for the session. And so many, feels like weeks ago, it feels like months ago, I put up an image in our Facebook group where we coordinate play of a ghostly boy. And then we didn't play for a very, very long time. And in my head, of course, I think about the world, I think about stuff, and so Jean-Marie comes from Orléans, so we need a reason to move the action to Orléans. We need an event to happen in Paris that sends them to Orléans, but that's only if I want to enforce on them dealing with this werewolf story, and I don't want to force anything on them. We've played through the part of the campaign that felt like one-shots. And now I want to look at collaboration a little differently. A session is what a session is, and what the next game master chooses to do can draw from that or not, as they will, in a way that makes sense to them. And we can all trust each other to do a good job with that. We don't have to tie things off neatly at the end. So, what will this session be about? And I went back and I listened to the recaps, and I saw where the players lit up when they were talking about stuff, and it was the action of things. But where they got the most introspective was in the dark aspects. So how can we have both? How can we have this adventure, and how can we also have this introspection? How can we try and unite these things in a way that All for One unites these different genre elements into this splendid mashup that I like so much? So how can I do this? But I had no idea. I had no idea for a while. And then I thought, we haven't been inside the king's palace doing our duty. We've been forced outside, and the cardinal's guard got to operate inside, and that was incredibly frustrating. So why not have guard duty? And I like to start things in the middle of action. This is, I suppose, in a way, cliche, but at the same time, we don't have very long to play, and we're trying to go to these points of action, these high points where the characters are occupying that moment, and the players can find a way to join them there. So why not start out in the middle of action with a little bit of confusion and a little bit of chaos? So unlike normally where I might prep players saying, okay, this is the scene, and when I start the hangout, we're going to start right in the middle, right, and just go for it, enjoy it. I didn't explain anything. Instead, I just talked about the backdrop. I talked about how it's autumn. We're pushing on through October. These are guys that don't really take track of time. The musketeers kind of exist in this timeless shift work to drinking, to carousing, to moping, to praying kind of lifestyle. So I didn't get very specific about the date. This was something I wanted to reveal later on, but I talked about how the Spanish army had recently occupied a city only 80 miles away from Paris, and how that army is sitting out there, not very far away, really, hanging over the city like a hammer, and everybody in the city wondering when it's going to fall, and how this gives context to all the madness, all the perversity, all the desperation that we've seen in the background of all of our sessions. Winter is coming, which means that probably if they don't march now, then nothing is going to happen until the spring. And there's this agonizing waiting of, with the first thaw, does that mean that the armies march on Paris? This kind of desperation. And then I put them in the palace. We go live, and I start with them running down a hallway in pursuit of a Spanish spy. So they have the context for how the city feels. What are they going to do about it? With what level of desperation are they going to respond to the spy? But I'm mirroring the desperation in the spy that I've described in the city. So we get the sense that the spy is running for their life. They're panicked, they're making mistakes, they're nervous, and then Briscoe dives into that. And then the physical action begins. That's our opening scene. Our opening scene is chasing down a spy. We begin in the middle of the action. No real context other than you are musketeers and this is your day-to-day life, protecting the life of the king, or protecting the security and safety and sanctity of the king's palace. This is what you do. This is what you do all the time. That's the message I wanted to communicate. But at the same time, I also wanted to communicate that the lives of these musketeers are touched somehow by the supernatural. They see things, or they're aware of things, or they're willing to act on things that others maybe are not. They don't shy away from the horrors and the darkness. But that means the darkness is there. And so when they wrestle with this spy, the horrific happens. Someone so dedicated to their cause, and a cause so confusing that it instantly creates mystery. So the spy, when realizing that she, dressed like a man, but obviously a woman, she cannot escape, she drives her daggers into her own heart, expiring. But the last words she utters are not in Spanish. They're not about Spain, and they're not invective or insult. Instead, she whispers to Philippe, for France. And Ivan takes this to heart. He's a great combatant. He's used to defeating men. But here we have a woman, and someone that he finds striking. And she's just killed herself in front of him, and he's got no way to understand this. And I think Ivan took this in a splendid direction. He took it in a way I hoped he would take it. But even if he'd responded with bravado, we still would have had insight into the character. Maybe Philippe is fully introspective and and almost narcissistic. But now we know that there's a chink in this armor, and this character on stage for just a brief amount of time was able to find a chink in it. That was a great decision, I think, made by Ivan, conscious or unconscious. So we've begun with action. We've twisted that suddenly into mystery, and in the background, as this mystery is unfolding, and as Philippe is experiencing his shock at what has just happened, in the background we still have the high level of action and comedy brought out by the other two characters as they deal with the, turns out to be victims of the Spanish spy, two palace servants who have been coerced into appearing as musketeers and assuming their guard duty. We can only assume what happened to those two musketeers that these men replaced. Lots of darkness hidden away, sometimes passing unnoticed. This is the part of things where I, as the game master, need to start working. And I'll clarify that a bit in a minute. I mentioned earlier that I like to start a session with a clearly defined scene that relates to characters or context or both, and then just see where things go. And you can see an example of that in the first session that I ran and in all of the solo sessions that I ran in this cycle. This time it's different. I think it looks different and feels different, because it is different. This time the scene, that starting point, that impetus scene, is something that occurs much later in this session. I knew that I wanted to have a look at the day-to-day life of the Musketeers. We'd seen pieces of it, but it was always some kind of special event. Right? Musketeers having to put in an appearance at a party, this is a part of the Musketeers' lifestyle. We've seen that, but it's not them on duty. Musketeers on duty, we've seen that, but the Cardinal's Guard had stolen pride of place, pushing us outside of the palace. So we hadn't quite seen that. So it was time to see that, and it needed to be exciting. Because we can't just roleplay standing at guard. So I wanted to see that. But more than anything, I wanted this choice. That opening scene was a choice. But how do I get us there in a way that is part of who the characters are? And that's when it struck me that dueling is outlawed. Dueling takes place in private places, such as in cemeteries and private parks and the like, or on the Pont Neuf, right out in public. So if you are a musketeer, if you're interested in protecting who you are and whatnot, you're very likely to conduct these kinds of duels in a private place, and a churchyard is a great place for it. And a churchyard is definitely where I wanted to be. So, Philippe is duel bait. He's exactly the sort of person you want to challenge if you want to make a name for yourself. He's exactly the sort of person who's to be brought down a peg if you're like in the Cardinal's Guard and looking to humiliate the King's elite. He's just in a situation where duels are a regular part of his life, and we haven't really seen that either. So all of these things start to layer together. When you're having a duel, you need a second. Who is Philippe likely to ask to be a second? Well, of course, his lackey, maybe. Pierre from the fencing academy, maybe. But let's make it interesting. Let's have it be another musketeer, I think. And maybe he would ask the very serious Martin to serve as his second, and let's have a reason why one of the other musketeers will fill that role by removing Martin from the scene. So it could either be Jean-Marie or Briscourt, and I'd leave that choice up to Philippe. So that's interesting. Which one of the two will be there, and how will that flavor how the scene runs? I wanted to see that. But Jean-Marie in the scene in that cemetery would make it more powerful. The event was going to happen regardless. To whom it happened I left to fate. The event that I had planned as the opening signature scene is meeting the ghostly child of Jean-Marie in the cemetery. Now, I had hoped it would be Jean-Marie to whom that would happen, but it didn't need to be that way. But I didn't want to start with an unexplained duel and Jean-Marie having to make this choice. It would feel too much like that's what this session was supposed to be about, and I felt like people would take those cues and run with them and turn this into, a Jean-Marie focused story against their maybe their will or best interests or whatever. So I wanted, at the very last minute, like moments before I hit start broadcast, everything that I had prepared, I shuffled in my mind like a deck of cards. Like I said, I wasn't happy about the idea of starting with a duel, and I could only think of a reason for 2 characters to be there, and that might be a player character and a non-player character. I didn't want to start that way with people waiting, particularly because we'd waited so long to play. So the pursuit of the Spanish spy was created in my mind at that instant. Instead of characters being on duty in the palace and possibly having a chance to detect the activities of the Spanish spy, it became, okay, detecting the Spanish spy is a given. And what's the most interesting part about this for an opening scene? That would be pursuit of the Spanish spy. So that becomes our opening scene, and other things tumble out of place. Maybe to be encountered, maybe not. There's a lot of things that I wondered might happen, didn't come to light, and that's fine. And there's things that I had to invent on the fly because of how the characters approached the threads of the story, and that's what I live for, so that's great. So they gave me an awful lot of stuff to invent on the fly within the framework of the situations that I had created. But what made this situation so odd, of course, is that my initially intended starting scene is now not my starting scene, and it's going to happen somewhere, and I don't know where. So what did I prepare? I knew who the Spanish spy was. I knew why she was in the palace. I knew how she got in and how she planned to get out. I knew how she had managed to coerce these 2 guards. This is something that the characters uncovered in play, how she had managed to do that. And I knew who was pulling her strings and why. And I didn't have to invent that to any great degree, because we've already seen signs of this in my first story and in Ivan's story. There's hints of people who practice magic in the background, some kind of cult or cults. And in the core book, there is a very strong message about a very particular, very driven cult that does things like bringing cults together, absorbing and or destroying cults that won't join in. So all of that was there for me to hook onto as an idea, connecting to the source material. So why is the spy connected with them? That is something that can be left less defined and be allowed to be given better shape than what I have for it in context of what comes next, or in revelation of more secrets in what has already happened. This is something that can be defined or redefined, but the truth of who she is and the truth of her actions and the truth of her relationships are all now constants. They're constants before play started, and they were introduced in play as intended. Anything else can be added on to that, built on that as needed. So that's the spy. What the ghost would reveal to whoever witnessed the ghost was set. Now the order of those things is changed. And so I got to increase the sense of chaos by starting the session in the middle of this foot chase, chasing the spy. I got to mix it up with this mystery of the spy committing suicide. I got to further stir the pot by branching decisions. We need to investigate where the spy came from. We need to try and rescue the captive families of her unwilling associates inside the palace. And we have to deal with this duel which is coming. It's going to happen at dawn. All these choices. And every single choice made is going to branch into further choices. If this can all work live, on the fly, is purely dependent on timing and a willingness on my part to accept things like coincidence, bringing characters back together again, and with an eye on the clock, a willingness to step in and say, okay, I'm going to shift the scene now to some effect like time passes, you all come together and share your knowledge, kind of thing. Not so blunt, but that's a quick example. So, there we have it. The session was about presenting a tie from Jean-Marie's past to him to see what he would do about it. It was presenting a particular moment to Brise-Cour to see what he would do with it. And it was about the darkness which will continue to beat against the positivity and forward momentum of an enthusiastic character like Philippe. And what is he going to do about it? So we have this bleak, cold, very anti-Brise-Cour Paris, and where he has described Paris as being filled with lovely ladies and fun and parties and entertainment and joy, this Paris is dark and cold and afraid, and the people on the streets are bent and twisted, and they want something from him, but it's not something maybe that he is willing to give. Or how far is he willing to go to spread this happiness, this sort of thing? He is often remarked upon as being someone who would shirk duty for the sake of entertainment. Here duty is thrust upon him. Not by anything that I had planned, it just was a happy circumstance, and he rose to the challenge, exposing an area perhaps where the character can be expanded by the player to shoulder these new responsibilities of leadership that he has discovered. Philippe has fallen in love, in a sense, I think. Philippe has loved and lost in the space of a few heartbeats and the slow spread of warm blood. But then to see this woman again, risen before him, alive, and then to lose her again, what sort of effect will this have, if any? It's interesting to see where that will go. And no intentions, again, I'll say, did I have for that. Just to put a situation in front of him. All right. I had no idea if he would be interested in this character or not, but I hoped. And then Jean-Marie has to come face to face, as it played out, with the ghost of his son trapped between heaven and hell and purgatory, waiting for release. And maybe it will be the destruction of the werewolf who harmed him, or the people who made it possible for that werewolf to hide and continue to prey on the innocent. New plot thread, new twist on his vow, revitalizing that part of the character, which I think is important, and which clearly the player thinks is important. Seb brings it out often, and yet it hasn't been a focus of play. So now it's brought before us again, and we can act on it or not. Where things go from here, I'm not responsible for that. Now I'm a player for the rest of the cycle. I've done my part to look at what the threads that have been introduced are, and suggest ways that they might be tied together and unified into something that is maybe more coherent than it looks now. I have tried to show that I've been listening to who the characters are and the way that they're played, and tried to put them in a situation that lets them rub up against them in positive and negative ways. A little bit of friction to sand down rough edges or to be smashed through in defiance of things that would cause unwelcome change. So that is the ties that bind, and I hope that this session shows those ties, the ties between the characters, the ties between the characters and the organization to which they belong, the ties to their pasts, and the ties that they're now forging toward their futures. If this was accomplished, it's because of the players. And if it wasn't, it's because of me. Thanks for watching this recap and commentary. I know there wasn't much recap. The video is available, and the recaps from the other players are appearing and can be found in this playlist and on their own channels. You can find the account of Francois Letarte, who plays Briscourt, or Alphonse. You can find that on the JDRD30 channel. Philippe's thoughts and feelings can be found through Ivan Mike 1968, his YouTube channel, and Sebastian Allard, Noel Inquisitor. You can find him on the Noel Inquisitor channel, N-O-L Inquisitor. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.